you've told me before that you have a certain approach to instruction. And one time you were telling me that you understanding that people learn from that the mind works in a relative way, you would kind of find out what they knew about and use that as a jumping off point for metaphors or compare it and so that you could take what they already knew and move that over into a new way of learning.
It depends on the nature, or you might say condition of the student. And this thought is primarily with the much more experienced people that I started flying with in the early 60s in the Jetstar. And that were those people that were the students at that time were highly experienced pilots, and quite usually were chief pilots at big corporations and that sort of thing, people who could afford the Jetstar, which was very few back then. That being the first airplane that sold for $1 million. I was just reading a story about the Sabreliner just the other day, and the guy mentioned that the Sabreliner sold for almost $1 million, but the Jetstar did sell for $1 million and over. Mm-hmm. So it was one of the earlier airplanes, and obviously came to the biggest corporations, the Fortune 500s and people like that. So those people, you might say, already had a barn full of experience and knowledge, and it seemed at the outset that what was I doing there? You know, I couldn't compete with the actual figures of experience and that sort of thing with some of them, and so I guess by default I worked my way to a process that would work best with them, and that turned out to be just what you said, that the best thing to do is find out how they did it and examine that, and if it was satisfactory, then let it alone. You know, I didn't really need to teach them the things they knew, mm-hmm. and so I tried to find out what that was and teach them only the things that were different from that I thought they needed. And I guess that worked pretty well because I had a lot of success with that group of people. And the measure I use more than anything, those people could all fly and almost always, you might say, would succeed at whatever type of flying they were doing, but what I measured was whether they seemed to enjoy it or not. Mm-hmm. And mainly that by the after effect. After I got through with the course with them and turned them loose, did I hear from them again type thing, you know. And I did. In many cases I made extremely good and long-term friends. And without rare exception, they all turned out to be successful in their flying from the time I flew with them on, which I guess I've analyzed as I didn't get in their way anyhow. Mm-hmm. But I enabled them to transfer to the Jetstar world from where they were. Mm-hmm. The specific condition was that the Jetstar was the first certified passenger transport airplane with bent wings and jet power and flew at very high altitude, was pressurized and flew at extremely high altitude. Mm-hmm. The first airplane that exhibited the fact that for jets, the early jets anyhow, you had to get up high to get efficiency. Right. And so all of those combination of factors made the transition from the airplanes they were flying to that was quite extreme. So the idea was to try to get all that new stuff integrated into what they knew, right, and develop what they knew so it fit that. And it was, I think even today, I think it was a pretty big job, but back then it was, you might say, an outside, unknown situation. Mm-hmm. Lockheed developed a course curriculum, I guess you call it, a schedule of how to do it, and myself and two other fellows that came in with me, I was the first one to do that and develop that course, and those two guys came in with me, and the three of us did almost all the Jetstar training in the first 10 years and covered, you might say, 99% of the companies, Fortune 500, whoever type companies they were going to get into advanced aviation at that time. So it was a pretty big area, very interesting.
And you worked later on for a training company, didn't you?
On a what?
Didn't you work for a training company?
Training company?
Well, you were flying. You were teaching them to fly. I think it was Jetstars, and you had I have a picture of you in front of a class. This was later on after you, I think, maybe left Lockheed. You were working for a different company.
Well, I went to work for a company that owned a Jetstar, but that wasn't for training. That was for I was just a corporate pilot by definition. I operated the airplane for that company.
Well, I've got pictures of you.
I remember a picture.
You were in front of a classroom, and I think you developed the course for this place.
Well, that was part of the Lockheed. That was Lockheed.
Oh, was it?
That class was well, not necessarily. The first opportunity for that was Lockheed.
Mm-hmm.
I taught the first Jetstar classes for all these people coming in, and the other two pilots that I had didn't participate in that teaching. They weren't into the things like teaching ground school, and that was beneath their dignity, I guess. And so that was Lockheed and the classroom situation. But the picture you're thinking of maybe was flight safety. That was way after Lockheed.
Okay.
Lockheed was 1955 to 70,
Okay.
and flight safety was from 1980 to 1990.
Okay.
Quite a different period. But at flight safety, I basically didn't do anything but classroom. I had a classroom and a curriculum that was published, and people came from all over. By then, the Jetstar was well developed, and I just taught the Jetstar to the people who had them and were hiring new pilots, and they would come through.
But the course when you got there, did you modify that course after you got there?
Yeah, I sure did. They had the flight safety instructors, by and large, I'm sure at the point I went with flight safety, were competent in a certain manner, but the one that quit that I replaced was typical, in my opinion, that he was a mechanic, not a pilot, and he was intelligent enough, good fellow and all that, but he approached the instructional thing as a mechanic would. Details is what I guess the summary I can put on it. And when I went in there, and after I took his material, which I couldn't even decipher to some degree, and began to work with it, and I had to rewrite and reorganize the course, and then start providing material to present the course with, photographs and written material, text or so forth. Did all that and developed the course the way I liked it, and I guess over the only measurement here is that after about 5 years, I guess, it fully developed, and I began to get letters of recommendation or appreciation or whatever you want to call it from the people who had come through the course, and it pretty well developed. It developed so much that the head of flight safety, Al Ucci, which is a very famous aviation name, who owned and started flight safety, wrote me several letters and communicated with me and communicated with whoever was assigning my salary too, so it helped a lot. And one of my early Jetstar students, Dunn, who was the Texaco chief pilot in the 1960s, and he's a very famous aviation person, and he had retired and gone to work for flight safety, and he came around and presented me with the idea that he and Al Ucci were good friends, and Al had sent him around to the schools. Flight safety owned, I don't know how many they had, probably 8 or 10 places around the country. They had Houston, I know, and New York, and Marietta, where I was, and Savannah. They had quite a few schools, and Don came around gradually to all of those, and he came by our place first to examine my method and my course and try to take it out and insert it, you might say, into all the others, because all their back there they had just felt they had decided at that point that the result they were getting from the customers was that everybody ought to do what I was doing, and I tried my best to amplify that for them, but all I did was nothing very bright at all in execution. Just the idea that you don't teach pilots with a hammer, you know. that don't help pilots very much to be able to change the tires or that sort of thing. You had to take a pilot's viewpoint, and so I just took the course and took all the mechanic stuff out of it and inserted pilot thoughts and approaches and attitudes and tried to present it that way, and it worked pretty good.
Did flight safety have a simulator?
Yes.
I thought they did.
They had the Jetstar simulator at that time. Since then, there's been another one. I don't know how fully developed, but apparently completely developed. I think there are two now. Maybe neither one now. I don't know whether in process. It's been a long time, but eventually there became two. But flight safety had the first one at that time. That was the basis for their school, because they charged plenty. I've forgotten what. There's thousands, like $20,000 for a pilot or a co-pilot to come through the 2-week school, and the only basis for charging that was the simulator. It was built in England. I don't know why. I don't know the background of that technical view, but it was built in England and shipped over here, and they anchored it, so to speak, and their maintenance came from people who had gone through their process in England. We had, remember, the high spot of all that is a guy showed up one day. We were having a little trouble with the simulator, and the people that had worked on everything just couldn't quite solve it. They thought they could, and they tried, they weren't solving it. It was in the flight characteristics of the simulator, which has to be a computer process. And this guy showed up from England, and he was an Indian, Ganges Indian, not American Indian, and he had 5 fingers on each hand. He really did. He had another little finger here. And everybody thought that was pretty odd. He said, "Oh, it's just wonderful." So he go in bars, he could always get a free drink off of that. He was quite a character, but he was extremely bright. And I remember he listened to 2 or 3 of the maintenance guys and a couple of the people there to tell us what we thought was wrong with the simulator, and he took the operational manual of the simulator. It was like an airplane manual, only had the technical details, the wiring diagrams, and computer programs of the simulator in it. He just picked that book up, and literally, and this is not exactly, but it was almost, he just thumbed it like this right through the book, and he put that down, and he went over to the computer console, and he typed in a few things, and he started to walk out, and everybody said, "Where are you going?" He said, "Oh, I fixed it." Just like that. It was just a matter of minutes. He solved that problem and fixed it.
Wow.
And it worked fine after that. So that always impressed me greatly, that some people got the insight into the computer system.
Yeah. When you, we're getting things a little bit out of sequence here, but you've had a flying school with, I believe, 7 champs.
Yeah.
And
No.
what was your approach? Go
The
ahead.
flying school didn't have 7, but I owned 7 through that period from, say, 1945 to 1954. I had owned that many champs.
Okay.
I don't think the school, I don't remember, I think the school probably never had more than 4 at a time.
Okay. Well, I think
Same.
I've got a picture of 4 or 5 flying in formation and low over the field.
Yeah, 3.
3, is it? Okay. Anyway, when you had that school, what was your approach to teaching then? You were working then with people who didn't know how to fly yet.
Yeah,
And
beginners.
what was your just philosophically speaking? What was your the way you kind of taught?
I've never analyzed that. I don't know right offhand to answer you, but I'll think about it a little bit.
Okay.
I would say first impression to answer that would be just to get along with the people well, try to be friendly and get their attention. And then to the only real instructional technique that comes to mind is that, I said it and I forgot it, let's see, that you have to find out if what you want to say and what you're saying you think is actually being received. You have to go through a process of getting to where it was and come back and check it and see if that's what you sent. It's like just like an email. You can send me one and say, "What did you see that other one? What did it say?" I'd have to answer that, and if I answered the right thing, then this was satisfactory. Mm-hmm. I think that was the first big instructional breakthrough, you might say, I made. Mm-hmm. That was very successful. Never had any trouble. I had one, I think, let's see, start to say I had one student, let me think, it seems like to me I remember was another case one time of, there is, I think of another one. I had in all my instruction, I only had 2 people I can remember now that I didn't succeed with. One was a Bonanza pilot. I remember he had about 700 hours in his own the Bonanza himself, and he had it for years. And as a VFR pilot, and he wanted to go IFR, and so he hired me to fly with him in his Bonanza and teach him IFR, which I got into the process of. And after about not too long, about probably 10 hours or something like that, I just bearded him, so to speak, outside his airplane one day and said, "This ain't working. You're never going to be an IFR pilot if you don't radically change something. I don't know what's beyond me." And he just, as far as I know, I don't know what he did. I don't know whether he went on somewhere else or just quit or what, but I recommended he quit trying to be an IFR pilot till something changed inside his head or something. As I remember, he could not fasten on bank angle. He'd roll in, and one time it'd be here, and next time it'd be here, and next time it'd be here, and next time it'd be here. Just he had no consistency in bank angle, which is extremely important to get all the factors together.
Well, when you had that school, was it, tell me about that school a little bit. Were you in partnership with somebody, and was there a pilot training program that was already printed that you used, or did you kind of develop your own pilot training program?
Where is that now? When?
When you were doing the champs. Yeah.
Oh.
Tell me about that school, or those years.
That was I just achieved my instructor license. That was in 1946, and I was just flying in this little airport near my hometown, little dirt field, Cobb International, and a friend of mine, Frank, kind of
a dirt field named Cobb International.
Yeah, that's a good story in itself. I'll get back to it. You remind me of it. But Frank was a good friend, but he was kind of a carefree, careless kind of a guy, and fun-loving. And suddenly I was out here flying, having fun, and a month or 2 later, someone didn't see him for a while, and he showed up one day and said, "Hey, I got a job flying. I got my instructor's license in a new field across town. There we knew somebody was building, see the grading that was been there, but that was being built. That turned out to be Park Airfield by name, and that was being built to take advantage in early 46 of the GI Bill that came out for the people in World War II, and that's what it did. It joined several thousand airports around the country that suddenly saw the advantage in that and adapt their needs and their operation to it, so to speak. And that was what Park Air was doing. And Frank got a job there as their first instructor, and came and told me about it, told me to go get my instructor's license, and they were going to hire another pilot right away, another instructor. And so I jumped down to the Atlanta Municipal Airport and got somebody to fly with me and got my instructor's license, and went up there, and sure enough they hired me. So the 2 of us together as instructors worked at Park Air through 46 into 47, which seemed like a short time, but the GI Bill came up, and went down at the end of 47. And so I was instructing what I would say, description I was instructing under the auspices and curriculum of the GI Bill program at that time. Of course, the GI Bill was Congress. They didn't have a flight curriculum, but they simply adopted the FA or CA at that time, who had basically not a curriculum, so to speak, but a regulation which exists today. To get a private license, you got to do this, you got to do this, and this. So all the curriculum was some written method to be sure you did this, and to check it and be sure it was a good result, and so forth. So that's what I was doing then. And you might say the CA was responsible for the content of the program. We were responsible, I would say, to the degree and the success of it, you might say, but it was a very regulated or standard curriculum in those days, and still is. That same program has come right on through to today. It still exists in the regulations, FAA regulations. And the main change in that comes to my mind, just as I say that, is that in 1954, after I left Park Air and I went to Fulton County Airport in Atlanta, the GATO, or the FAA General Aviation District Office there, was headed by a guy named Lee McCure. And Lee was an older guy, but he was a pretty good government man, you might say, was doing his job there very well. And it was pretty broad specs for what he was supposed to do and did. And one of the things he came up with was the need to standardize how everybody applied the FAA regulations for training a pilot, a private pilot. And he came up with a thing called a flight test guide, which still exists today. You may have seen it. And he was working on that